Alrighty. Greetings and hello. My name is Don Taylor, and this is PLP Pathways Webinar number 8. We're sponsored by the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education. I'm a 7th and 8th grade teacher, and we're winding down our 3rd year of working with PLPs in the classroom. And I'd like my collaborators and colleagues to please introduce themselves, and then we'll get going on today's webinar.
Hi, I'm Maura Kelly. I'm a 7th grade humanities teacher at People's Academy Middle Level. This is our 2nd year of implementation here at People's Academy, and I think that's it.
Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Hunt. I'm a 5/8 teacher on Swift House and Wilson Central School. This team's been using PLP for I think over 20 years, and we just recently got them online for electronic portfolios. So happy to be here.
All right, so just real quick before we get going with our discussion today, don't forget professional learning opportunities that are available both through sort of the University of Vermont St. Michael's College and the Middle Grades Collaborative. We encourage people to be looking for opportunities to sharpen their chops this summer. The Middle Grades Institute is happening June 27th through July 1st at Castleton State University, and that is now open for registration. I'd also like to mention that Kevin and I will be running a PLP Pathways workshop on Monday, June 20th at the Williston Central School, which is going to be free for all any Vermont NEA members, and that's a partnership between the Vermont NEA and PLP Pathways. And if you'll notice, I'm sure you guys have been paying attention to your principal's weekly memo that are coming out from the AOE. There are lots of personalization and personal learning opportunities available this summer. So hopefully you can join us for some of those. They've been really beneficial, at least they have for me, to my learning. So today we're going to sort of talk about a topic that's come up about PLPs. It doesn't have to do specifically with implementation, but just thinking of the larger issues of PLPs and looking at my students and the students who are excelling with personal learning and maybe some kids who are still struggling. The questions come up about whether or not personal learning, how equitable it is for all students, and how, whether it's exacerbating the achievement gap, whether it's helping to close that gap. And so my question to Maura and Kevin is, do you think that personal learning plans and that personal learning experience has been equal for all students? And how can teachers ensure that personalized learning is creating opportunities across the spectrum of the kids that you're working with? So how are you thinking about this, and how are you addressing it in your classroom?
I can start us off. So this is something that I've really been thinking about over the past sort of 2 years. I would say last year we were just getting started with talking about growth mindset and talking about goal setting and really letting students create their own goals. And when we came across certain students who were struggling, we were like, well, this is the first time we're asking them to do these things. I think by next year it's going to be a much different experience because students are going to have already had a year practice, and they're going to get it. They're going to have learned from the past year, and they're going to get it. And then this year, I would say many students were more thoughtful about their goal setting. They were a little bit more engaged in the process because they had done it already. However, I still have that cohort of students who oftentimes when given opportunities for student voice in their own learning are just kind of struggling with it a little bit and fumbling and changing their ideas a lot, having trouble getting started. And these were things that I was really hoping, because we're building routine and it's going to be continuous and over time, that would kind of solve itself. The problem would sort of solve itself. So in thinking about next year, I've really been thinking about how I can partner with community members and connect these students to extended learning opportunities and maybe mentors. How can I connect these students with an expert in something that they're interested in? How can I give them this opportunity to get that sort of personal attention that they need and sort of widen their community a little bit? And so I've really been thinking about how do we make those connections with other people to make the learning more authentic for these students who might need a little extra support.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, I love the idea with the ELOs. I think that's, I've been thinking about that too. We obviously do a lot of that stuff with our 8th graders when they do 8th grade challenges and whatnot, and they establish a mentor early in the year and reach out to the community. But thinking about how to do that, especially on a 5-8 team with our 5th, 6th, and 7th graders from year to year. But yeah, in terms of bridging the equity gap, I feel like with PLPs, it lends itself to this whole, the growth mindset, obviously personalization and standards-based learning and assessment, which to me, I feel like those things all, especially together, help close that gap. Because instead of, just focusing on one area of a student's life, being academic, this is kind of a broad range. You can say, okay, you're excelling or working toward these various just pieces of your life, and you're giving these students an opportunity to show growth versus just saying, okay, here's an A, here's a B. This is showing who you are. And I think, especially as the state's moving towards standards-based proficiencies, it's helping to just bridge that. And I think all those three things kind of coming together is helping to give those students who typically haven't had a voice or haven't been able to advocate for themselves in class, it's been giving them more of a voice and making them feel like they're more part of the culture and community versus having an adverse effect.
Okay, so in both of those statements from you guys mentioned some really big ideas. And I just want to go back to first of all, Maura mentioned this idea of a routine and continuous over time. And both of you mentioned this idea of extended learning opportunities and also these community relationships. And my experience has been that when kids don't have embedded opportunities for those extended learning, so for example, you may have and again, this is where the whole equity piece comes up, because if you ask kids, well, who's volunteering, for example, on Green Up Day, you may have a cohort of your kids who are going to be doing that. But not everybody has that same support and that same structure to be involved in those citizenship or those activities that are going to show them how they are a part of the community. And so what and how can we be structuring consistent routine opportunities for kids in the classroom that then become supportive of all students? So, and I really liked what Kevin said too about having these standards, these standards-based learning opportunities. And I guess my question, to both of you is, how are we creating a curriculum that is allowing these opportunities to develop, that's allowing personal choice from the students, but also consistent, so that kids are going to be having similar experiences that then we can assess how they're doing in those experiences using, for example, the transferable skills and students' own reflection. I mean, that's a little long-winded, but I just wonder if you can respond to that. Like, what does it look like in your curriculum, I guess?
Well, I know for us, we have within our curriculum, we have our typical programs. So like for math, we have our Bridges Math program. But based on from team to team, we have flexibility in being more traditional based grading or standards based. Like on Swift House, everything we do is all standards based reporting and grading and assessment. So that's definitely helpful. And then within our curriculum too, again, it's flexible from team to team, but just giving choice, like allowing students to pick the choice of lit book. So they're still they're still involving themselves with this literature group, but they have a little bit of a voice as to what book they're going to be reading. When we do projects in humanities or social studies and science, it's more choice for the students in terms of like what types of medium are they using to show their understanding of what they're learning about with these projects. So I think those types of things definitely lend themselves to I guess your question that you're getting at, but yeah, that's a tough one, but I'm really hopeful that the statewide push for standards-based learning is going to help with this, because I think it is going to help having us all take a step back and look at the programs and curriculum that we have in place and saying, okay, let's align this to certain learning targets that we want to focus on. Let's align this to certain learning skills. So instead of it being more of a regurgitation where we teach students and they repeat it back to us, it's more of a communication piece. So we're teaching these students, and as we're going on, we're communicating with them via these learning scales and learning targets. So I think that's going to help, but it's not that's not an easy answer by any means.
Well, it's a tough question, and I think it just goes to, this idea of with personal learning, right? I have kids who are just, you knew they were going to do well, and they're doing well, and they're self-motivated, they're self-advocates, and they have all this, they have experience, they have structure, they have support, and so for them, it's, the gates fly wide open and anything's possible. But, how do we make it so that every kid is getting those opportunities? You know what I mean? And I'll give you a case in point, is that today there was a youth climate march in Montpelier, and I asked for volunteers to go to that because I thought it'd be a really cool experience. And the kids who volunteered are the kids who you would expect to volunteer, right? But when we went to the event, it was really cool. And if it happens next year, we'll take the whole class, right? So you have these whole class activities. But how do you structure choice into that, and also make sure that all kids are having that experience, and not just for a sort of a community experience, but in our curriculum, And so it's a little bit vexing, right? But I think it's something that we need to talk about. Otherwise, we could see the same schism between the educational haves and the educational have-nots. Maura, did you want to?
This is something that I think about all the time, and I think about, we do a lot of expert projects, so within the time period that we're working on, so we're looking at a proficiency around the conditions and motivations that lead to conflict, and then potential solutions. And so right now we're looking at the Civil War, and students are picking topics that they're becoming experts on, and they're doing these projects. And it's interesting because you have these students who, they're like, I'm going to study slavery in Vermont, and my family, we're going to go to the Rokeby Museum, and we're going to look at a stop on the Underground Railroad in Vermont and all this stuff. And then you have other kids who probably have no idea that that exists because it's not part of the conversation that they're having at home. And so how do we make sure that all students have access to those things, or even know that it's available? And I don't really have a good idea of what to do, but I think I almost feel like I need my own database of connections, and then when something comes up, I can say to kids oh, here's a list of 5 people you could talk to, or making it more real for our kids, I think, is really important, especially the students who might not be getting experiences. I think there's a huge experience gap, and I think I'm a big proponent of summer learning opportunities for students, and learning opportunities in the sense of experiences, because I think that it's really an experience gap that's happening with our students, and even across the state. There are very rural areas in the state of Vermont, and so some students their experience is just very different. And so thinking about how do we, bring what students are learning to them so that every student feels like they have ownership and a part of it. That's a big challenge.
Well, it is. But let me, to be fair, let me give you another part of the conversation that I'm thinking about, is whether or not the PLP, as we've structured it and we've thought about it, because I think that on the whole we have some very similar parts. So if I'm looking at my PLP, we have a whole section on citizenship, and we have a section on community and relationships, and we also have this section on exploration. And recently, a participant in a personalized learning class at St. Mike's College presented on place-based learning and service learning and community-based education. And I'm just wondering if there's a way of fitting these parts together with transferable skills to create a curriculum that includes democracy and action learning in the school, but then extends out to include community partnerships, and also provides kids that this notion that you just said of an experience gap. I don't know if I've heard it termed that, but I think that's huge. And so how can we, is there a way, I guess, that we could leverage the PLP into a curriculum that is then accounting for that experience gap and is striving to create equity in our classroom and among students? I mean,
I think it's the reason. It's the why we do things. I mean, I think we've always known that place-based education is an amazing model, and community-based and service learning is the model. But this is giving us sort of, I was actually having a conversation with another humanities teacher today, that this is giving us the why are you teaching what you're teaching? And so why are your students outside, in the community doing this thing? And the why is that, it's proficiency-based. It's based in those transferable skills and the graduation requirements. And it's, I think when we're thinking about curriculum, and I'm just coming from it from like the social studies perspective, instead of saying you have to teach, from this time to this time on your timeline, you now can really try and think more broadly and skill-based, and it's giving us the vehicle. The PLP is sort of the vehicle that's lending us to be able to capture these moments for kids.
Okay, Kevin?
Yeah, I think I've definitely piggyback on that with that PLP is the vehicle that allows these kids to capture those. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And just getting back to what you were saying, Don, it's such a big vision, and I feel like a big paradigm shift, to get to where we want to go. And our last in-service, I don't know if you guys have seen the video Most Likely to Succeed by Greg Whiteley.
No, I haven't seen that one.
Awesome video. He looks at a school in San Diego, and it's a great documentary, and it's just all this experiential education, going back to the roots of, things that John Dewey was talking about. And what's cool about this school is they bring the community into the school versus really requiring the kids to go out, and that's neat. So that's why I'm thinking here when I'm listening to us talk about how are we, I guess, bridging that gap, that experience gap. It's, when we have the kids here, we have control over who comes in and who comes out most of the time. So why can't we do more with, bringing that experience to them? Bringing in professionals in the world, and to at least, if nothing else, have time to work hands-on with them or have a conversation. Obviously, it's not going to be the same as going out in the world and experiencing things, but I think that's a step in the right direction that is more manageable than, I guess, some of the bigger picture thinking.
And I think if you start looking at schools as a personal learning center, so if you had these, because when a financial analyst comes in and talks to all 50 of your kids, to me, that's equity. That's where you're exposing all the kids to it. But then you have to start helping those kids with the transferable skills of, okay, what questions do you need to be asking from these people to successfully communicate what you want to know, and then understanding what they're telling you. And so maybe that's just a different sort of way of looking at it. And I understand that we're not going to have answers to this now. I do want to mention that Life Lagueros from the Tarrant Institute just wrote a blog about this that was posted. That's really good, really thorough, and he's also talking about the sort of the equity gap. I just had a couple other questions too. We'll revisit that equity issue, obviously, as we continue to think about PLPs. But I had a couple other questions for you too, relative to the end of this year. And well, before I go there, I just want to, Maura, you mentioned mentorship, and Kevin, you mentioned mentorship as well. And because we also now have a 5, 6, 7, 8 school, I'm wondering if any of you have thought about formalizing your mentoring capacity so that you have 8th graders teaching 5th graders about the PLP, if you've thought about making that a formal part of your curriculum, again, also addressing opportunity, equity, citizenship, and participation.
Yeah, so I can actually speak to that real quick. We have that in place currently where our incoming fifth graders, we do place them with a seventh or eighth grade mentor. So that relationship is established, and then throughout the year we give them opportunities. So when we have our weekly PLP time, I'll oftentimes say, okay, mentees sit with your mentors. Mentors kind of take them through the process, answer the questions. So it's essentially, it's that layer before they get to the teacher. So they have that communication with their mentor, which takes pressure off of me as well, because I have 25 students, that's 25 PLPs. Obviously, I'm not going to get to each individual one, so that really takes a lot of pressure off of me to allow the mentors to do their work first, and then as things come up, I can get to them. But that was something that I was astounded by when I came into Swift House is that relationship that they had, because that's something that they've been doing for quite some time. It's just that mentor-mentee relationship building piece with the 5th and 8th graders.
And how, just a nuts and bolts question, how long do the mentors stay assigned to the mentees, and how do you figure out good fits, and what does that sort of look like organizationally?
Yeah, so typically it's a 1 year, so it's for the 5th graders coming in, and we spend a lot of time going over like essentially a core draft where between the 4 of us we place students and make sure it's balanced, so we each have the same number if it's 6th, 7th, 8th graders roughly. It'll vary, and obviously the boy-girl balance. But before the 5th graders come to us, we have a step-up meeting with their teachers and special educators, and we figure out what their personalities are like. We have the students come in and meet us, and they do some station work with a couple of our current students. So they get to be introduced to our space, and they get to ask questions. They get to, what are you worried about for next year? What are you excited about? And they get to interact with our students. So just at face value, we get to see, okay, we kind of understand who these kids are coming in. And then we spend a lot of time over the summer figuring out who's going to be a good match, who our stronger mentors are, who the stronger 5th graders coming in are that might, they could have a mentor that maybe isn't as strong. So it takes a lot of thinking and work, but it works out. And it's something too, if it doesn't work out, then we'll reassess it, and we've made adjustments as need be.
Not to ask you to do more work, Kevin, but what would be really cool is if you had just a bulleted list of a timeline about what that looks like, so that, because now that we have 5th graders in our school, I'm wondering if we could set something up like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just sort of your planning progression, so that if we were going to think about that, perhaps we could do that too. And more, what do you have going on at Peoples?
So we take time when we come up to sort of the big moments, the big PLP moments. So students, setting the goals, setting up their portfolio, getting ready for student-led conferences. Those different times we have our 7th grade cores are matched with a 5th grade core, and then we match students up that way. So for example, my class would be matched with another 5th grade teacher's class, and then we'll mix them up. And that just sort of came organically out of the 5th graders trying to get things going, and it just, the 5th graders, they had a lot of kids trying to set up their sites at one time, and they were like, we need some help, and we were like, we have a great solution, we'll get some students in with you. And it's really started our conversation of how can we make this more sustainable? What is it going to look like for next year? And our model is shifting next year, so we're going from straight grade to multi-age houses next year. And so one of the hopes is, so we'll have 5-6 houses and 7-8 houses. And so one of the hopes is that we'll at least have multi-age within the classroom for TA. So 7th and 8th graders can partner together on their PLP work, but then also thinking about how can we partner with the other houses, so like a 7-8 house partnering with a 5-6 house, and trying to work on that. But I think it's invaluable. Like, I think it's so important, and I know from the data that I've received that our students, I've seen them the most engaged in talking about PLPs than I have all year when they're working with the younger students. And so I think it's really important. And so thinking about our schedule, which is completely different next year, and our structure is something that I think is really important.
All right, thank you very much. Those, once again, giving me a lot of ideas for next year, and it's something that I probably haven't paid enough attention to, and I need to start thinking about that. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I just want to hear from you folks how you're wrapping up your year with your PLP, if you have exhibitions happening or discussions happening, and what that looks like, and maybe just 1 or 2 thoughts about plans for next year and what you're going to be working on.
For us, we don't have an exhibition, but we are finishing up with our student-led conferences. So that's the big piece with the PLP process. We typically don't end up doing the exhibitions just because some of our students have personal goals that they may not want to share out in front of their classmates, and we just didn't want to put any pressure on them for that. So that's why we kind of just keep that within the PLP team, which being the students, guidance counselors, parents, and any other adults who have a relationship with that kid. Moving forward, one thing that I've been grappling with is we used a new template based, and I took a lot of your ideas down from last spring when you came in to teach that St. Mike's class, and kind of revamped the template that we were using. So now I'm thinking more like vertical alignment. Okay, we have these fifth graders going to 6th, 7th, and 8th going to high school. What's that look like? And I'm trying to think, do we keep these kids with the same template that they've been using, or do we adjust it because we use Site Maestro as well, which means you have to essentially start from scratch. I can't just blast out a change and have all their templates now change. And then it's like, what does it look like for the 8th graders going to the high school? Ideally, like my vision is I'd love by the time this 5th grade class is our 8th graders, I want them to be able to go to their communication goal and say, wow, look at my work from 5th grader up to now, and look at how much my goals have changed and all my work. Just have them be able to have that all on a page. I think that'd be really powerful so they could see their growth. On the other hand, I can see where that can get real busy, and I'm just thinking, would it make more sense to kind of start fresh each year with a template, but have them link in their previous PLP from the year? So I've been all over the map in terms of what logistically is going to make the most sense.
So can I just, Maura, before you give your contribution, I've thought about that too, and one of the solutions that I came up with is to use drop-down menus. So on Google Sites, I'm going to keep for example, my identity. That's not a good one. I'm going to keep my goals page, right? But if you then if you move kids, if you have them take their material and put that onto a new page, for example, and title that 7th and 8th grade goals, and then they put that down on a drop-down menu, and then when they go to 9th grade, they create their new goals page. So their current year goals stay as their main page, but then you use a drop-down menu to access previous work. That's at least with Google Sites, that's the solution that I've come up with, because it allows for easy navigation. Yeah. And if you use tables of contents, you can link between sections.
Yeah, I've been using table of contents within the pages so they can see, like for right now, they can just click trimester 1 and blast them down to that page. So that's how I was envisioning just changing the title on table of contents to 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th graders, right, keeping everything on the same page.
Right, but if you use the drop-down menus, it keeps it a lot cleaner.
Yep.
And you lose the the having to scroll all the way to the bottom of the page.
Right.
And so that's just an idea I've come up with. It also makes it a lot easier if formats are changed between grades, that you still have the ability to insert drop-down menu locations like sites that'll exist somewhere out there in the ether, but a kid can get that URL and put that as a drop-down menu.
Great. Okay.
So anyway, that's one way that I've been talking with some 9th graders about the transition from 8th grade to 9th grade.
Yep.
And the other thing I want to just really quickly, I've gone back and forth about Google Sites, right? And one of the things I believe is that Google Sites, even though it's a little bit clunky, it's a constructivist approach where kids are making their own sites and they're creating the navigation. It's almost like Legos where they're putting the blocks and pieces together. And a lot of people say, well, it's not very slick or it doesn't look that great. And what I tell them is, well, our kids are they're developing their sense of visual aesthetic and they're developing their sense of spatial reasoning. So for that, Google Sites is great. But part of our transformation to the next phase of learning may be for the kid to reflect on what they like and don't like about Google Site. and to pick another platform that then will make their PLP look as advanced as their developing intellect. So anyway, those are just some thoughts. Maura.
Okay, in the last minute, I had just sort of been thinking that we would wrap things up the same way as we would. Typically, so we are doing an exhibition. Our 8th graders present their portfolios to their 9th grade teachers and guidance counselor. Actually, that has been happening as they're choosing courses for next year. But then we also do an exposition where parents and teachers, current year teachers and next year teachers, come together and view the students' portfolios. We also have traditionally had students set summer learning goals or summer experience goals, and had them, just capture evidence, not necessarily reflecting. And then we do work with that at the beginning of the school year. However, now that I'm thinking about it, some students are going to have me again, which is different. Like, we've never done multi-age, so we're kind of at this really nice point where we can, after 2 years of experience, try and start new if we want to. So I was actually thinking about the site, and I'm sure that there are changes and we can get feedback from the students. After this year, what would you do for next year? So I think, there's a lot of areas where student voice is going to be really central to some pretty big changes that are going to be coming down the pipeline next year. So I'm not 100% sure, and I don't want to necessarily build it all for them, because that kind of takes some of the ownership away. But I can tell you that traditionally, one of the things that we've said is students archive sites and then create them a link to their next year's sites. So, for example, my 7th graders that I have this year as 8th graders will have on their site as an 8th grader, will have links to their archived 7th grade and 6th grade site, so they can go back and see their growth over time. So, but in terms of what that's going to look like, I'm not sure now that it's going to be more in a loop.
Right. All right. Well, thank you both. I know, again, I thought that I had some rest and relaxation over April break, and then I showed up on Monday, and I don't know what happened, but we're back at full speed. Our next webinar I have down for May 26th, which is Thursday before Memorial Day, and then I have a scheduled for one more on June 9th as well, which is also a Thursday. And so in those two, I'd like to sort of be one, winding down, and B, winding up for next year and what we're going to be doing. I very much appreciate your contributions as always. Thank you very much for being on the call. For any viewers out there, please don't forget about the Middle Grades Institute, June 27th through July 1st. There are other professional learning opportunities available out there. You can see some of those on PLP Pathways, both the website, the Twitter feed, and Google+. And until we meet again, thank you to the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Maura. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Don.
Bye.
Bye now. Take care.